old and new. Like the pre-Raphael painters, and many other artists of the era, Tennyson was fascinated by the Middle Ages. However, he combines this traditional subject with up-to-date concerns. In his epic poem, Idylls of the King, which retells the story of King Arthur, he warns his contemporaries about what can happen to a powerful kingdom like Victoria's Britain. A melancholy that is the opposite of faith in empire and progress informs Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach. The speaker stands on the edge of the island kingdom and contemplates the chaos encroaching on the world. He hopes, almost desperately, that a personal relationship will survive that chaos. Top of page 952, the sonnet. In Sonnet 43, Elizabeth Barrett Browning states her belief in the power of love more positively than Matthew Arnold. She adds a distinctively Victorian note of piety, reverence, and religious belief to her love poem. Victorian poets were as committed to the sonnet as were the Romantics, and none more so than Gerard Manley Hopkins, a Catholic convert and Jesuit priest. He experimented boldly with the form. In God's Grandeur, a traditional sonnet enhanced by experiments with meter, he proclaims his faith in a divine presence in the world. Again, do note on 952 we have 3 vocabulary words there that you'll want to study. Let's look at the next question. What literary forms did the Victorians invent or perfect? The first one, the dramatic monologue. Robert Browning, Elizabeth Barrett's husband, perfected the dramatic monologue. In this poetic form, a character is speaking to a silent listener and in the process revealing more about himself than he realizes. Browning's strange and chilling speakers are the British cousins of Edgar Allan Poe's mad narrators in stories like The Cask of Amontillado and The Telltale Heart. The next heading, the novel. The dramatic monologue takes readers into the mind of a character, as does the popular Victorian genre, the novel. This genre was as central to the Victorian period as the drama was to the Elizabethan. Usually published serially in magazines, each new installment of a novel was eagerly awaited by all levels of society. The novel's social commentary and realistic descriptions presented the Victorians to themselves. The great theme of these novels is education, the depiction of a hero or heroine learning how to secure a proper place in society. Final heading on 952, note of melancholy. At the end of the era, A.E. Housman does not react as Tennyson did to the premature death of a young man. He does not seek the meaning of such a death in cosmic terms. Rather, in To an Athlete Dying Young, he offers ironic consolation. In an age of prosperity and progress, pride and power, England's poets and novelists reminded their countrymen that empires crumble, individuals are fragile and vulnerable, and death awaits us. On 953, let's look at this contemporary connection box, the Brontes, fantasy forerunners. For today's readers, the name Bronte invokes 2 renowned classics, Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights and her sister Charlotte's Jane Eyre. Less known is the fact that the Brontes, 3 sisters including Anne as well as their brother Branwell, were among the pioneer writers of fantasy. As children, the Brontes lived with their widowed clergyman father in a bleak and isolated region of northern England. Perhaps as a result of their isolation, they immersed themselves in a world of make-believe. Inspired by their play with Branwell's toy soldiers, they invented the lands of Angeria and Gondal as settings for their fantasies. They peopled their make-believe empires with fictional characters and real-life heroes such as the Duke of Wellington, Napoleon, and various Arctic explorers. Also, they recorded the elaborate adventures of their characters in books using tiny handwriting that adults needed a magnifying glass to read. The Bronte children may not have intended their childhood tales to be widely read. These fantasies have been published, however, and have even inspired well-known authors. Not long ago, Joan Adkins published a book entitled Dangerous Games that, as she says, uses bits and pieces of the Brontes' Angeria. Let's turn now to 954, the recent scholarship and the James Barrie growing up in colonial Jamaica. About James Barrie, the author, please read with me on 954. He was born and raised in rural Jamaica. James Barrie, born in 1925, now lives in London. His poetry and prose are enriched by both Creole language and more formal English. In 1993, Barrie won the Coretta Scott King Award Honor Book and the Boston Globe Horn Book Award for Aben and His Son, a work of historical fiction set in Jamaica. Barrie's works of poetry include Fractured Circles and Lucy's Letters in Loving. Let's go ahead and read Growing Up in Colonial Jamaica, first heading, A British Colonial Child. I grew up as a British colonial child in Jamaica, British West Indies. I was made to feel that there was something special about being British. You were born into honoring the British flag and feeling that the British way of life was best. Yet you also knew in a strange way that there was something alien and inferior about you. I came to realize that this has to do with race. Because we were a black people, we knew that we were different from the rulers of our island who were white. We sang songs in praise of Britain like Land of Hope and Glory, which glorified Britain's colonial past and power. And once a year on Empire Day, we sang Rule Britannia with its line, Britons never, never, never shall be slaves. We sang with fervor because Britishness seems to offer a sense of safety and belonging. But we also knew that our ancestors had been slaves and had been enslaved by the British. As a child growing up, we had these two different histories to contend with. You felt and knew that your colonial existence was strongly influenced by your slave history. It made you feel almost an outsider in the world because there was nowhere you could appeal to. Next heading, schooling. It was the British way of life that constructed our schooling. We received a good basic education in ordinary subjects like English language, arithmetic, biology, history, and geography. The maps we used showed British territories colored in red, and we were proud of that. We were made to learn a little verse about Queen Victoria setting us free. Our reading books were not based on Africa or Jamaica. They brought us the culture of the British Isles. The stories and poems in them were all British. Many of the poems were from the 18th or 19th centuries. They had all the weight of grand English usage. Most Jamaican, I'm reading at the top of 955, most Jamaican children spoke our island dialect every day at home. But if you spoke dialect at school, teachers would shame you. They would say, this is not a place for bad talk, quote unquote. Speaking English properly was tremendously respected and was connected to further education. Final heading, the mother country. We grew up with the idea that all the best things came from England. On Sundays, my father liked to ride to church on an English saddle that he had sent to England for. People would save up to order shoes and wedding suits from England. At church on Sundays, we prayed for the king and the royal family. These were our hopeful figureheads, possible sources of influence. On Empire Day at school, we were issued with tins of sweets with pictures of the king on them. England was our mother country. Our Jamaican colonial history is different from that of many other colonial peoples because our own mother country sold our ancestors as slaves, and we grew up disconnected from Africa. In this kind of situation, a country takes a long time to recover from its own history, but this history has given Jamaicans a unique status in the world, a connection with Europe, as well as a link back to Africa. Well, there you go, an introduction to the unit and the Victorian period. Let's now turn to a number of titles as we begin our study. Thank you.